years. It was like, oh, people knew nothing about the shroud except that, oh, it's fake. And that's it. But now, years have gone by. It took 29 years for the British Museum to release the raw data from 1988. Can you imagine that? 29 years. And when they did release it, it was determined that it was in fact unreliable, and there was no way they should have ever come to that conclusion. But the damage was done. And a lie, takes a long time to undo. It's like, okay, then how can this be a fraud if no one even wants to try to replicate it? Because the complications to replicate the shroud, we have a criteria. We have 8 criteria on the website, whocanhebe.com. And the criteria are stunning, which also points to the fact that what else could this Shroud of Turin be but a representation of Jesus Christ as a nanosecond before he was resurrected.
Diving right in to discuss the Shroud of Turin with Myra Kahn-Adams. She's a media producer and conservative political religious writer, a regular for Town Hall and The Hill, as well as numerous other outlets like National Review, Washington Examiner. She's also the author of 2 book series, Bible Study for Those Who Don't Read the Bible, adapted from her work with writing for these publications. Myra is the executive director of signfromgod.org ministry and the National Shroud of Turin exhibit.org. So welcome, Myra Kahn-Adams. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Amazing. Now, I started this show off talking about my fascination with documentaries and how I've seen a lot of different documentaries on the Shroud of Turin. I just eat it up because I just love those topics. And, it's been interesting to see the journey of the Shroud of Turin. In some of these documentaries, would claim that it had been debunked, and then it was like, wait, this was done wrong. So just before we dig in too deep, how did you become interested in the Shroud?
Well, the first time I really can remember that I saw the shroud, but it was really represented on a crucifix in a church in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, and it was a bloody, bruised Christ hanging on the cross. And it was horrific. And I looked at the label beneath this life-size cross, and it said, adapted from the Shroud of Turin. And I thought, what's the Shroud of Turin? I'm not even familiar with that. So I started doing a little research, and that's how I first found out about the Shroud of Turin. And one of the things that actually is really a pet peeve of mine is when you see Christ hanging on a crucifix in a church, you often see the spear wound in the side, or you see the crown of thorns, or you see the piercings in his hands, or it's actually in his wrists, not in his hands. That's another thing that's always wrong. But you don't see what he really suffered. And the Shroud of Turin is a mirror of the gospel. It is, in fact, the representation of his suffering that you read about in the Gospels, but you don't really understand it. You don't really see it. And in the shroud, when you know what you're looking for in the Shroud of Turin, you see his sufferings. You see all the scourge marks. You see the blood. You see the crown of thorns. But it's not even a crown of thorns. It's a cap of thorns. There are thorns like this big that literally they just stuck into all over his head, not just around his head like a crown. So you see the sufferings. And there's so many mysteries involved with the shroud, and that's why today the Shroud of Turin is reaching new heights of popularity. It's never been as popular as it is now, and that's why you see so many shows and documentaries and books and exhibits, and it's just phenomenal what is going on because people are just fascinated by it. In fact, our exhibit that we hope to build in Washington, D.C. is called Shroud of Turin, the world's greatest mystery. So, and that's what fascinates people. That's what probably brought you into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite remarkable how the image reflects the biblical word. I mean, whatever the biblical word described what happened, and the image, there's nothing that refutes how the word of God describes what happened. that day.
Mhm.
But it has, of course, come up against scrutiny. There's been plenty that have wanted to debunk it, if you will. And for a while, a period of time, they had claimed that it had been debunked. Can you explain what happened there?
Yes. That happened in 1988, and that really feeds into what we just did in Washington, D.C. on February 8th. But I'll get to that in a minute. In 1988, the British Museum tested the Shroud of Turin, and that was 10 years before when the Shroud of Turin research project called STURP, which is actually the first time there was ever a comprehensive scientific examination of the shroud, and what they concluded was the shroud was not the product of an artist, and that was phenomenal, a phenomenal conclusion. So what happened in 1988, the British Museum decided to test it. What they did is they used what was then a new technology called carbon dating. They did the carbon dating. They violated every one of the protocols that they had determined they were going to use to do this right. And they determined that it was produced by an artist in the Middle Ages, sometime between 1260 and 1390. And that created around the world, scientists were just gasping, saying, how could this possibly be true? Because that means that this Middle Ages forger would have had to know about photography 500 years before the dates that they're saying that the shroud was produced. Because in the shroud, not only is the mystery of how did that image get there, but hidden within the shroud is a photo negative. Oftentimes when people see the shroud, they see a black and white image, but that's not what you see with your naked eye. That was only discovered in 1898. And that's the photographic mystery of the shroud. It literally is a positive image that is hidden in the shroud, which was determined to be a negative image. So what you see with your naked eye is a negative image. But when it was photographed and developed in the darkroom, you see a positive image. And that positive image is where you can truly see, well, today we call the holy face. You can see all the wounds. You can see over 100 scourge marks. You can see the marks of torture that they know literally came from the implements that the Romans used for torture, because they literally can see the design of them and know that those match up exactly with what the Roman soldiers used when they were going to, puncture people and wound people and scourge people. So when the 1988 carbon dating came out, it created this huge problem. It basically shut down any belief in the shroud. It just kind of buried it. And for many years, it was like, oh, people knew nothing about the shroud except that, oh, it's fake. And that's it. But now, years have gone by. It took 29 years for the British Museum to release the raw data from 1988. Can you imagine that? 29 years. And when they did release it, it was determined that it was in fact unreliable, and there was no way they should have ever come to that conclusion. But the damage was done. And a lie, takes a long time to undo. So that's where
Yeah.
we are today. We had a challenge that we had the press conference February 8th in Washington, D.C., right after the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast. And this challenge was really an offshoot from what happened 2 years before. There's a very famous film producer named David Rolfe. He lives in the UK. He had challenged the British Museum in 2022 as part of his movie, Who Can He Be? And in that movie, he said to the British Museum, okay, you say this is a fake that was produced in the Middle Ages, then here's $1 million. Why don't you reproduce the shroud using the technology that's available from the Middle Ages, which is ironic because they can't even produce the shroud today with the technology we have today. So the fact they had to produce it with technology that was for the Middle Ages, it was crazy. And of course, they said no. They literally didn't even ever get back to David. But I said to David, I saw him last September in the UK. I said, can we bring this shroud challenge to the United States and just have it challenged to anyone, not just the British Museum? Let's open it up to anyone in America. So that's what we did. February 8th, we announced it. And we're waiting to see if there's 6 months before people have to apply. But we're waiting to see if there's a university or some enterprising grad students or an organization of some kind that wants to take on this challenge. If not, it's like, okay, then how can this be a fraud if no one even wants to try to replicate it? because the complications to replicate the shroud, we have a criteria. We have 8 criteria on the website, whocanhebe.com. And the criteria are stunning, which also points to the fact that what else could this Shroud of Turin be but a representation of Jesus Christ as he, a nanosecond before he was resurrected.
Yeah. And let's talk about that. If it's hard enough to, I mean, obviously no one's been able to replicate it, even with, like you said, by today's standards, let alone with what was available in the Middle Ages. So to help people understand, how can you explain how this could have happened from Christ? As I understand it, my rudimentary knowledge of what's been explained before is that when Christ was resurrected, he actually emitted this bright light, and that's what caused like the photographic image. Is that your understanding of like how this could have happened?
Yes, there are theories. There are many theories that have not been tested. One of the most predominant theory these days is that particle radiation came up within the body of Jesus in this burst of light that was, you can almost think of it like the light that created the creation, this light. Let there be
Yeah.
light, as God said in Genesis. Well, this
Mhm.
light that came up from within the body of Jesus, produced by particle radiation, came up in this burst of light that created this image on the shroud, but did not destroy the cloth. So think about that. Something that's so powerful. Why would it have totally destroyed this linen cloth? And we know from the Bible, Jesus of Nazareth was wrapped in a burial shroud that belonged to Joseph of Arimathea. And we know it was a very high quality linen cloth. But this linen cloth had to withstand this burst of light that even today we cannot replicate. Scientists have tried to replicate that burst of light, but they haven't been able to. So that's one of the leading theories, and it's
Wow.
unexplainable. It could be tested sometime. It's just not being tested, and that's a whole nother story we can get
I love
into.
that you brought up like, this burst of light that makes me think of like, let there be light, like this creation thing. And when you were talking about that, it reminded me that when you hear proponents of pro-life movement, they talk about like, isn't it strange that there's this unexplained spark of light when the sperm meets the embryo, when begins, that they've never been able to describe. And so it's just fascinating, all these things that line up when you study God's word, when you look at science, when you look at biblical archaeology. It just always lines up, and it's just so incredible and fascinating. It's hard to believe that
Mhm.
anyone wouldn't find it fascinating. To that end, I believe, isn't the History Channel airing something on the shroud tonight?
February 19th, tonight. They are
It is
airing
February 19th.
as part of their series, History's Greatest Mysteries. And I think it's been around now for about 5 years. And the episode tonight is about the Shroud of Turin. And 3 of my team members, I have, including myself, with 14 experts on our National Shroud of Turin exhibit.org, and 3 of them are featured in this program. Barry Schwartz, Cheryl White, and Russ Briot. So I'm going to watch it. I'm very excited about it. They filmed it last October, and they didn't know when it was ever going to run, but now it's running tonight. So hopefully it will get very high ratings. And anything about the Shroud tends to be really popular. People are fascinated with the Shroud, which is why we are going to raise money. We are raising money to build a permanent Shroud of Turin exhibit in Washington, D.C. Because in a city of museums, there should be an exhibit that has the potential to change hearts, to change minds, that is about the world's most studied and it's the most studied, analyzed artifact in the world that cannot be explained. The number of mysteries, we could talk for hours just about all the mysteries, but that go into the Shroud of Turin, which is why people find it so fascinating. But there should be an exhibit. There was one in 2022. I was very involved with that. Our mother organization is called signfromgod.org. And my group, we helped propel and spearhead the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., had their shroud exhibit. It opened in February 26, 2022, and closed as scheduled at the end of July 2022. It was their most visited exhibit they ever had. But they didn't want to make it permanent for a lot of different reasons. It's hard to take a temporary exhibit and make it permanent when you just have the space. It's already there permanent for things. But that's how our group started, National Shroud of Turin exhibit. We are really an offshoot of the Museum of the Bible, deciding they didn't want to do a permanent exhibit. And so here we are. We're trying to raise money to make a permanent exhibit in Washington, D.C. In the meantime, we've been doing a whole lot of other things around the world. World Youth Day, we had... three of my people went over there, and they had literally millions of people over there, and they had presentations. We've done events at the Catholic Information Center. We had 4 events last year, and we actually have a replica there, life-size replica, that there started last March. We are moving it at the end of February. They need to repurpose that space. But we've had our first mini exhibit. Now we have the challenge. And we have some other big events happening. In the Catholic world, there's a very big event happening in mid-July. It's the National Eucharistic Congress. And there should be close to 80,000 people there. And you'll be hearing about it. It's going to be a really big thing in Indianapolis, Indiana, July 17th to the 21st. And we have an exhibit there also. So our group is doing a lot of different things. We just haven't done our main goal, our main mission is to build this permanent National Shroud of Turin exhibit, which, as you know, Washington, D.C. Costs a lot of money there. So we're trying to identify the space that we want to zero in on, and then hopefully raise the money because our team is unstoppable. I am blessed to lead this team of the most amazing shroud experts, and the momentum is with us. As you know, people like you are fascinated by it. And it just doesn't stop. The interest in the shroud, because the mystery of the shroud, it's like it's alive. We know that technology is a friend of the shroud. There are things in the shroud that we don't even have the technology yet to even know what's in there. And so the shroud is really a living object, just like Jesus lives. Jesus lives with all us. He's there. He's within our hearts and minds, and he's there. His shroud, his burial shroud with his image, lives too.
Yeah, it's just like the closest thing to being able to touch his garment, if you will, like the Bible story, the closest thing to being able to witness a miracle, a Jesus miracle. So I think that's why it's just so exciting that it's getting the attention it deserves, and especially with this challenge. But let me ask you, why DC? Like, why is it so important that the exhibit needs to be in DC? There's some of us that aren't too pleased with things that have been going down in DC. Is it because DC is where it's needed? I mean, where's the passion behind making sure that the exhibit's in DC as opposed to somewhere else?
Yes, there are shroud exhibits all over the country. So it's not like we're the first shroud exhibit, but no, we believe that having it in DC is because, like it or not, Washington, DC is the capital of the United States. Millions, untold millions of visitors come from all over the world, from all over the country to visit Washington, DC. And it's a city of museums. People come to see the museums. They also come for business. They come for a lot of different reasons. And having it in DC, I just believe that we can, in fact, have the greatest impact in a city that is the most powerful city in the world. We want to have an exhibit about the most powerful man, God, who ever lived, still lives. And that's why we want to have it in Washington, D.C. So there are other exhibits around the country, but having it in D.C. Would just have the notoriety and be able to impact people, not just people from the United States, but people who come from all over the world. And so Washington is an international city. And so we have the greatest, I think we have the greatest way to impact people for Christ and to explain why this shroud is in fact the most studied, the most revered, the greatest mystery that ever lived. And the fact that it even exists, the fact that the shroud exists in Turin, Italy. Of course, it won't be at our exhibit. It's at no exhibits. It lives in Turin, Italy. It should have been destroyed. It's only through miracle of what it is that it still exists. And that's a whole nother one of the greatest mysteries is, why does this thing still exist? Because theoretically it should have been burned in 1532. All those weird marks that you see in each side of the shroud was from a fire in 1532 that should have destroyed it. There was a fire in Turin, Italy in 1997 that should have destroyed the shroud. Hitler wanted to get it. They had to move the shroud. The only time the shroud's ever been moved from Turin, Italy, it's been there since 1578. It was moved secretly during World War II because Hitler wanted to get his hands on it. He believed that it was, in fact, Jesus Christ represented in the Shroud of Turin, and he thought it would help him win the war. So he was trying to get his hands on it, and they knew that. And so they secretly moved it. And they moved it to a place that originally it was going to be moved to. It was this big fortress in Italy. And ultimately, they decided not to move it there. And if they had moved it there, it would have been destroyed because the Allies bombed that fortress. And it was moved to a smaller church in southern Italy. And basically, it was there for the war, and then secretly was moved back. But that did not even come out until 2010, when it was discovered that this secret movement happened. And it's just one of the many, many examples how the shroud theoretically should not exist. So, answer to your question, it needs to be in DC because we think it can have the greatest impact there. And that's what we're going to try to do.
That's an excellent answer. You know, the light can shine brightest in the darkest of places. So that's a good choice. A good choice enough to have it there. Well, I so enjoy talking to you, Myra, and I would love to read more. You have a couple books out that I want to tell people to check out. How can we get a hold of your books that you've written?
The books are actually from my town hall Bible study. Every Sunday, this is starting its 5th year, started in February of 2020. I write a weekly Bible study on town hall. It's called a quick Bible study. And every Sunday it's there. So that's one way to check me out. But the books are compilations of those Bible studies. I had readers tell me, these Bible studies should be a book. So those books are actually compilations. But if you go to nationalshroudedturinexhibit.org, you can see what we're doing. We have a Facebook page. The Facebook page is actually signfromgod.org. But that's our mother organization. I love the name Sign from God so much. I love the logo so much. Plus it's our 501c3. So that is National Shroud of Turin Exhibit is a project of Sign from God. So they can go to that. And then they can, if you go to my town hall Bible study every Sunday, you'll see my Gmail address at the bottom of that. You're welcome to contact me. You can contact us through the website, nationalshroudedturinexhibit.org. And you can become a donor with us. You can donate right on the site. And just we pray for us also. We need prayer because what we want to do is going to cost a lot of money. But we know, as believers know, the Lord will provide. Jesus, I trust in you. We know He's going to provide for us because He wants people to understand the suffering of His Son, Jesus Christ. And the best way you can really understand the suffering that Christ did, what He did for us, is represented on the shroud.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, I so enjoyed. I'm one of those people that reached out to Myra. She was gracious enough to respond back and come on the show. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. I mean, it is of the highest honor. Thank you so much.